Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com, coming to you from the Global Forum on Nicotine here in Warsaw, Poland, 2024. And I'm with Cliff Douglas in person, which is great. Good to see you, Cliff.
Good to see you, Brent.
And you're the president and CEO of the Global Action to End Smoking. Do I have that right?
Right, that's correct.
Right, but it's a new name. Fill us in on that.
It is a new name. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Well, we changed the name from the original Foundation for a Smoke-Free World, and it's consistent with the changes that we decided to make that are pretty substantial in the way that this organization approaches the efforts to accelerate the end of the smoking epidemic in the United States and also, of course, globally. So in changing the name, we decided to do a couple of things. One is to highlight the accelerated, if you will, the enhanced public health approach that we're taking to dealing with this epidemic, which continues to be, of course, the leading preventable cause of death in the United States as well as elsewhere. The other thing is that, of course, I and the organization have been the focus of some controversy because this organization was founded back in 2017 with funding from Philip Morris International, or PMI. And coming from the world of tobacco control, of public health, this is a very logical extension of my journey in taking on this epidemic and doing it in light of changes in the marketplace and in our world in recent years. But I really wanted to make as clear as possible the fact that my organization is 100%, and I want to emphasize that, 100% independent, beholden to no one. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight was that even the name of the organization does not reflect language used by the original funder of the organization, which we'll talk about as Smoke-Free World. So instead, I am talking about ending the smoking epidemic and then, of course, focusing on the action side of what we're doing to support cutting-edge research that will enhance understanding and also increasing education given all of the misinformation in the world. And then, of course, globalizing it. And so you have global action to end smoking.
Now, your history is, legendary when it comes to fighting big tobacco in court and working with governments to get legislation in place to help with that. How has that past that you had impact your current job and where you're taking the foundation?
Sure. Well, I appreciate it. I don't know about legendary, but I've worked hard for several decades in taking on this epidemic in every way that I could think of doing that held promise to be effective. And from day one in my career, which started way back in 1988, when I entered into the fray by coordinating the national campaign in the US to remove smoking from airplanes, and then we were able, in fact, to globalize it by working with the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization to expand it across the globe. That was a great way to start, by the way, because entering into this arena and having some real success gave me a good positive attitude about the hope that we had for actually making progress in this area against a very formidable opponent, which was the tobacco industry. One of the things that I did over the years, working as a lawyer and as an advocate seeking to expose a lot of really bad behavior on the part of the industry over many years, was to take on the industry in various forms in courts of law, developing stories in the media, to really share the truth with the public and with decision makers, with people who are affected by this epidemic, the people who had become dependent on smoking, and in many cases then became ill and died. And that really has all been a very natural extension. As I've gone forward, in serving as an educator, as a college or a university professor, teaching these issues, working in government, in other words, just a lot of different roles. An extension to the work that I'm doing now, which also requires fire in your belly. It requires some real fight. And it requires adherence to what you really deeply believe in and focus on, because there are lives at stake. We're losing people needlessly every single day. And so it's important to me that I and other people whom I develop common ground with, find allegiance with, that we focus on the science, that we help people understand how it's evolved, and also meet people where they live. You know, people are having real lived experience, and they're not cookie cutter. These are not statistics. These are human beings with different urgent needs. They come from different places. They respond differently to different forms of incentives, and we have to find the best possible options to help them stop smoking, which is responsible for something in the neighborhood of 99% of all deaths from so-called tobacco use. And for those who either are unable to quit smoking using traditional means, or they just simply don't want to. They want to continue using nicotine, they haven't found a better option. We want to work with them to help them move as far down as possible what the Food and Drug Administration calls the continuum of risk, to minimize their risk of becoming gravely ill and dying early.
Cliff, you mentioned the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. This is going to be your opportunity to level some hits or some praise. Which is it for the FDA?
I've been working through these issues since the beginning of my career. It was way back in the mid-1990s when I developed an expose that then appeared on ABC News that for the first time informed people that the cigarette companies were controlling, they were essentially manipulating nicotine levels and nicotine delivery from their products with deliberate intent to create millions of unsuspecting dependent consumers.
Good evening, I'm Forrest Sawyer, and this is Day One. Tonight, a Day One investigation that took the government by surprise. There's something tobacco companies don't want you to know.
The industry manipulates nicotine, takes it out, puts it back in, uses it as if it were sugar being put in candy.
Why are you artificially spiking your cigarettes with nicotine?
We are not in any way doing that.
Cigarettes, they'll hook you fast, and it's not just an accident of nature.
They don't want anybody looking at their product so that they can doctor it, they can alter it.
A Day One investigation that could change the tobacco industry forever.
And it was all for the bottom line. And that prompted the FDA in 1994 to open what became an intense 2-year investigation into the cigarette companies relating to the engineering of their products, and then of course as well their targeting of youth, of underage people to be the starters and then become dependent on their products. Now, so over the years, the FDA tried and failed to regulate tobacco. Finally, after many years, and I attended the White House ceremony, which was a privilege, and shook the hand of President Obama and thanked him for having signed into law regulation of tobacco products for the first time in the United States. It's in 2009 for health and safety purposes. So at face value, that makes sense. But now, moving forward 15 years, what has the FDA done with what looks like substantial authority to help people quit smoking more quickly, to regulate these products in ways that are rational and have the greatest chance of transitioning this marketplace away from, by far, the most harmful form of tobacco use? Well, here's where the complaint comes in. Since the current director of FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, which oversees tobacco regulation for the US government, took his position 2 years ago, first of all, not a single product has been authorized by the FDA for its reduced risk potential. as being APPH or appropriate for protection of public health. Not a single one. In fact, in the history of the FDA, only a meager handful, the number 23 is often used, but it's more like 4 or 5 actual distinct products have been authorized. And they probably constitute about 1% of the entire market of e-cigarettes in the United States, meaning that about 99% of the products are part of the black, or in some cases what we call the gray market. They're illicit and completely out of the regulatory authority of this agency. And during those same 2 years, under this director, the FDA has authorized 800 new conventional combusted or burned cigarettes for the marketplace. Those are the products that, used long term, will cause the death of one of every two users. That's under this pathway, the regulatory pathway referred to as substantial equivalence. These products are considered to be substantially equivalent to other conventional cigarettes on the market. So there you have it. What happens when an average member of the public who hears anything about this and is trying to think of what they can do to reduce their risk, to stop smoking, looks at all of the options out there, and they see or they hear that the FDA, in its regulatory wisdom, has decided that 800 new cigarettes should be allowed on the marketplace, but not a single alternative, safer nicotine-containing product should be allowed on the marketplace. What does that tell you?
Now, isn't that the problem, that no public is going to actually hear that? I mean, is mainstream media, NBC, CBS, ABC, Wall Street Journal even, I mean, nobody's reporting on that.
No. I mean, there are some reporters who do a very nice job. I think we're seeing some improvement in thoughtful reporting that's looking at all of the science, getting a sense of the politics around this, which are kind of dense and complicated, and better informing people about this concept of relative risk. That there is, as the FDA does say accurately, as a basic matter, involves, there's a continuum of risk. Cigarettes are extraordinarily harmful at one end of that continuum. At the other end, nicotine replacement therapies, gum, patch, and so on, which are actually approved by another part of the Food and Drug Administration as being safe and effective. And let me just say here, by the way, that a lot of the focus is on nicotine as a bad actor all by itself. But as the former director at the FDA of the Center of Tobacco Products, Mitch Seller, has said, when you separate the nicotine from what he termed the dirty needle of the cigarette, then you have a whole different story. You can have medicinal products, safe and effective. Nicotine cannot be that bad an actor if it's regulated, if it's called safe and effective by that same agency. It's the same nicotine. It is the same nicotine. But in the world of tobacco control now, and this points to the kind of transition that I decided to make based on the merits, in the world of tobacco control, all of these products and this concept of nicotine here and nicotine there is sort of conflated in very confusing ways. And I'm afraid that, we've been talking about the FDA. The FDA continues to do the same thing through its direct, concrete regulatory actions. And then in terms of the mixed messages at best that it keeps sending to the public, that it sends to the US Congress. A day before we sat here today for this interview, Brent, there was a hearing in the US Senate where, again, the director of the Center for Tobacco Products testified and just couldn't give a straight answer about relative risk and what's actually better for people to use. Instead, it focused on the potential harm to children, to kids. That's a legitimate concern. It's also frequently misrepresented even today as involving, an epidemic of youth vaping. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, whose work I've admired in many ways and still do now, nonetheless, has been on Twitter or X in just recent days, claiming that Juul is used by many youth. Well, I can tell you that the number of high school seniors in the United States using Juul, it's about 0.6%. That's not an epidemic, it's a blip that couldn't be avoided in the real world where kids just experiment. But frankly, it actually represents an incredible success story in deterring kids from being exposed to nicotine. So they're
not smoking.
And they're not smoking. They are not smoking. It's now under 2% for high school seniors. You know what it was in 1997? It was 36%. Right. In the United States, smoking rates for high school seniors was 36%. I was right in the middle of that fray. We were dealing at the time with Joe Camel and the cartoon Camel advertising and marketing that took place. It was proven to have enticed a lot of kids and interested them in using a product that was both highly addictive and lethal. It was a very different time. We have made so much progress, and I've been privileged to be a part of this journey from almost its start until today. But now we're in this new world that has to be taken into consideration if we're going to continue making this progress and accelerating it, because you know what? Globally, over recent years, smoking cessation rates have actually slowed. Mm-hmm. So we're losing some momentum. And while we're talking about the US in particular, it has to be noted, because we're focused on social justice and supporting those in greatest urgent need of support, that about 80% of people who smoke today globally are in low and middle income countries. Those societies which can least afford the medical care, provide the preventive services, the cessation services, and it's a calamity. And that's why we see today, according to the World Health Organization, well over 1 billion human beings globally using cigarettes. They're using the combustible tobacco products that are still by far the leading preventable cause of death.
In the US, the Justice Department and FDA announced a federal multi-agency task force to curb the distribution and sale of illegal e-cigarettes. That's just recent. So they're saying they're going to get serious, and aren't almost every single product on the market in the US illicit?
It's essentially virtually entirely a black market. So here's what I would say about enforcement. I'm in favor of enforcement. Everyone is in favor of enforcement. Enforcement has to improve. But in the real world circumstances that we're all operating in right now, what has perversely taken place is that the FDA's regulatory approach has produced, in effect, this incredible, overwhelming, out of control marketplace of illicit alternative nicotine products. It has supported, essentially, it has enabled a marketplace where conventional burned lethal cigarettes are available still just about everywhere, but virtually no, it's essentially a de facto ban, virtually no licit, legal, far safer alternative nicotine products are available anywhere. So that the 12 or 15 million adults who are using vaping devices and other alternative nicotine products, nicotine pouches, for example, in the United States, by and large, have to turn to the illicit market for them to use products that will help reduce the risk of illness and save their lives. But they're using products that are not regulated by the FDA, because the FDA has chosen essentially to take a path of prohibition and is not really seriously engaged in the business of seeking to make available a regulated, provably healthy off-ramp for millions and millions of addicted cigarette smokers in the United States.
I mean, this is a disaster, is it not? I mean, the U.S. is the single largest vaping market in the entire world. Can you even fathom that they could get all of those products off? We're not even talking about counterfeit disposables and this and that. I mean, any one of these products is illegal in the U.S. and is just a regular standard brand, open e-cigarette, open system e-cigarette. So, I mean, these are legal products in my mind, but they might not be in the U.S., I guess.
No, well, most products in the U.S. are not legal. No, there's kind of a gray market. Some of them have been subject to what the FDA refers to as agency discretion, regulatory discretion, so that while they're under review through the pre-market tobacco application process, they're permitted to remain on the market. There is an element of those that are there. So they're not really fully lawful, but they're just kind of being tolerated by the FDA in the meantime until it gets to the point where, frankly, based on their track record, the agency is likely to reject most all, if not all, of their applications for authorization. So we have a backward system where the by far most hazardous products are available on a widespread basis. They're sold lawfully everywhere you turn, and it's almost impossible to find a legal, not to mention a product that's actually appealing and useful to people, anywhere. So anyone who looks at that rationally, and I challenge all of my colleagues in tobacco control and public health to explain otherwise. This is a marketplace that is supporting, in effect, the sale of the most dangerous products and just not doing its job to help millions of people in urgent need, adults who in the next few years, in too many cases, are going to experience serious illness and early death. And in fact, today, we are losing, well over 1,000 people in the United States to cigarette smoking today. And you know what? 2/3 of them, keep this in mind in a very concrete way, 2/3 of them are not going to die from cancer. They're not going to die from lung cancer or pancreatic or colon or any number of the other cancers caused by smoking, which will develop over time. 2/3 of them are going to die from cardiovascular disease. They're going to die from stroke. They're going to die from heart attack. And those are events that when you stop smoking, the risk of them, it drops precipitously and within days, weeks, months. So every day that we engage in this charade of anti-public health tobacco regulation is costing us lives.
Now, would you agree that if the U.S. made a complete 180 turn on vaping, so FDA, CDC, just 180, that would not dramatically change the global perception of vaping? Would it not have an effect across the entire world?
Yeah, what happens in the United States does have an outsized impact outside of the United States. That's been true for many decades. And some of that has been very helpful. The U.S. Surgeon General's reports that have been produced on cigarette smoking and then other tobacco issues since 1964. So now we're 60 years in to having produced dozens of those. They become some of the most important resources across the globe. They're generally very well done. They're vetted very carefully. They have a lot of scientific know-how that goes into the writing and editing of them. So that's just an example where the U.S. has had, ripple effects for folks all around the world. In addition, the political, the regulatory approaches taken in the U.S. have for many years served as models, as examples to be emulated or at least to have action based upon around the world. But that has clearly been called into question in more recent years, where if you look at the examples of the United Kingdom, particularly England, and you look at New Zealand and a handful of other places, they have really leapfrogged the United States in the area of promoting harm minimization as part of a broader tobacco control strategy, while the U.S. has lagged behind and, as we've discussed, been taking action that's really pretty deleterious. If the U.S. changes its direction, if it does more to really help more people by very clearly communicating the truth about the nature and health effects of nicotine, the truth about relative risk across different types of nicotine-containing products, it will really help jumpstart a lot more action, I think, in a number of other countries who look to the U.S. even today for the information that it provides and the example that it sets.
Now, how likely is that to happen?
Well, right now it's not looking very likely that the U.S. is going to be making a dramatic change in direction, because even as recently as the last day, when representatives from the Food and Drug Administration appeared before the U.S. Congress to testify, they really doubled down. They really doubled down on the kind of messages and descriptions of the regulatory actions that they're taking or intend to take, rather than accepting, some constructive criticism, even complaints about the less helpful actions that they've been taking. And so it just doesn't bode well unless we see a change in personnel or some change in call it the politics, the culture around it going forward. It just looks like FDA is going to engage in doing more of the same. So what do we do about that? I'd just like to note that they're not the only game in town. They are an 800-pound gorilla, as we'd call it. They make a tremendous difference. But we are still able to communicate accurate information to the public, accurate information to healthcare practitioners, the health professionals who treat the public, and guide all of us in some impactful ways on how best to stop smoking, what actions to take for our health. And the FDA will do what it does, but we are going to continue. In fact, we're going to accelerate under our public health mission through Global Action to End Smoking and working with many colleagues in public health and beyond to tell people the truth. We're just going to share objective, evidence-based scientific information, and we're going to do the best job we can to speak directly to health professionals about what they need to understand about this area so that they can best inform and guide their patients.
Allow me to make a suggestion. It's been a couple of years since we talked about this on our show, but that would be an organization such as yours going out with some kind of a whole truth campaign that would be just strictly the science and a harm reduction message. And why not throw some 30-second spots up on Fox? There's plenty of networks that'll take an ad. It doesn't need to be prime time. Probably $1 or $2 million. Figure out a way to get some help paying for it. But it just seems to me that if you could get a couple of ad sales departments to clear those ads, that would say something if those kinds of messages were showing up on network television.
I love the idea. And, oftentimes what this comes down to, Brent, it's to state the obvious, is the resources. And, let me touch on that question for just a moment, because a lot of the discussion focused on the controversy around my transition as I've moved through my career and now, in the last 8 months, taken the helm of what we've now named Global Action to End Smoking, has focused on the fact that the original funding came from cigarette company. We took significant steps from the get-go to stress and make clear and ensure our strict independence. Again, 100% independent, beholden to no one. When I joined the organization, the original arrangement with the company was ended, and the organization has gone forward without any communication with the original funder. I don't even know who would be managing these issues there. No one's really asked me specifically. I haven't talked to anyone in industry since I went through the initial process of negotiating a complete transformation of this arrangement. That's important. The other piece of it is that we then adopted a policy whereby we would never accept any further funding from a cigarette company or even a medicinal nicotine manufacturer. I mean, that means, or excuse me, a non-medicinal.
Like a
vape company.
Vaping is tobacco.
Tobacco-free kids and my alma mater, the American Cancer Society, have relationships with pharmaceutical companies, and that's all well and good. We would probably entertain the same thing. But, I note that because we received a final payment from PMI and then arranged complete separation. And that is a static bank account. And it's important for people to understand. It is not going to last forever.
What?
And it's very important. In fact, it's probably not going to last a very long time. We are going to do everything we can, as we are now, based on our strict independence, to diversify our resources, develop new collaborations, new partnerships. It has nothing, people who know me know this, it has nothing to do with so-called big tobacco. It has only to do with the science and the merits of this case and trying to save more lives. And as we are able to pursue, diversifying our resources and ensuring a longer-term, healthy future for an organization that is dedicated to nothing more than informing people accurately and ensuring that people get the best guidance possible based on their own personal lived experience in a compassionate basis, just to save lives. That is it. And doing that, and doing that successfully, will enable us to pursue more of just the kind of thing that you're talking about, which is to find all of the ways, all of the vehicles for communicating directly to the public. It can be through television. It can be through cable. It certainly is and will be through social media and by other means, so that they have that truth. Sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's a curse, but generally, as most of us are, I'm extraordinarily supportive of our freedom of speech rights, our freedom of speech culture in the United States. And we can freely express the truth about the science, about relative risk, about the realities of nicotine to everyone. And that is what we are doing now, in fact, with the relaunch of my organization as Global Action to End Smoking. We are actually out in many media now sharing this type of information. And if you look at our new website, which is globalactiontoendsmoking.org, it's long but simple, globalactiontoendsmoking.org, we're speaking to people. We're sharing just the facts. We are providing information in plain language for the layperson. We're providing information directly to health professionals, because these are the folks who need good information and where there is so much deep misunderstanding today. In fact, our own survey that we supported last year, which built on an earlier one from Rutgers University, found that roughly 2/3 of physicians, not only in the US but all around the world, misunderstand these things. They think that nicotine causes the cancer and the other life-threatening illnesses resulting from smoking, and it's not true. The nicotine will fuel the epidemic because it causes dependency for those people who smoke. But the illness results from the 7,300 other chemicals and the 70 carcinogens, cancer-causing substances that are produced when a cigarette is burnt. It's not from the nicotine. So if folks don't have that basic understanding, they can't make rational decisions for themselves, or in the case of healthcare practitioners, in terms of guiding the people who need the best advice.
Well, and this is where the box, and I'm trying to, I'm pressing on this to see if there's a solution somewhere, because just recently, what is it, Medscape, I think it was, and there was a controversy around Dr. Brad Rodu and Sally Satel's great CLE type course, right? Where you could train doctors about the the truth around risk-reduced products. But yet, that whole program got yanked because there were,
right.
So if the vehicles and avenues towards training doctors and providing them information are completely closed, how do you do it?
Yeah. The example of Medscape, it became a quote-unquote scandal because of the funder. Basically as simple as that. To my knowledge, the information provided through that continuing education program was entirely accurate. And it was important. Is important for physicians as well as other healthcare practitioners to incorporate in their understanding and then in their practice of medicine. And the reason that it ran into trouble was because it received funding from a cigarette company. That raises the issue, and it's a very common one that I deal with every day, of the challenge involving who funded it, who the messenger is, and who the audience might be. And were that exact same information provided without funding from a cigarette company, which it could well be because it's scientifically accurate, it would have been received completely differently. I don't know that there's much that we can do about that in this world, because even in the case of global action to end smoking, let's be real about this. The original funding came from PMI, cigarette company. I and the organization, the board of directors, which is, by the way, also strictly independent, no connections, never had any to industry interests, took very significant direct concrete steps to ensure absolute separation from that original funder. But it's still a convenient argument for the World Health Organization, for my friends at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and some other interests who have their own conflicts, if you will, when it comes to funding and the like, don't always talk about it. It's very convenient for them to not address the merits, as in with that continuing education program, or the merits related to our communication and our communication and education to the public and to healthcare providers about the facts at hand. Instead, they just focus on, but look where the money came from. End of story. And I do believe there may be good intent, that many believe that's a conflict, that there's nothing you can do about it. Everything else must therefore be dismissed, no matter what it is or whether it's accurate or not. But what it does effectively is it shortchanges public understanding. It shortchanges the knowledge that members of the media really need to have to report accurately on these very important public health issues. It shortchanges the knowledge that your doctor or my doctor has to have in order to guide us, their patients, in appropriate, most effective health behavior. And it's a real shame, because what it means, and I'm not going to personalize this, I'm just part of a larger dynamic. It means that the cancel culture, the dismissal of truth, is pretty much out of control. And I appeal to my colleagues out there. I appeal to those whom I've worked with so closely for so many decades to just come to the table. We have to bridge this divide, which I've referred to in recent years as this internecine warfare among people who really should be working together, linking arms, and focusing on the challenge at hand, which is best informing people and helping save more lives, and stop the kind of superficial criticism that isn't advancing us in any way, but it's skirting the merits of the science and the needs of millions of adults who smoke and urgently have to get the support that is going to best help them. So rather than getting to that, I think there's too much general, again, superficial discussion about this out of convenience and out of agendas that we have to recognize but do something about.